Hello and welcome to this week's edition of Behind the Headlines, and in this programme today we'll be discussing the growing humanitarian crisis facing Armenian Christians in Nagorno Karabakh. As last week Azerbaijani forces invaded the region and now over 120,000 Armenian Christians face the prospect of genocide. And once before in their history, the Armenian people suffered genocide at the hands of the Ottoman Turks during the First World War. And if the international community remains silent and inactive, the Armenians face the prospect of another genocide. Regan, it's great that we can do this programme, and of course with this situation it's fast moving and it's very fast paced. The situation is changing all the time, but we have our hearts and our prayers must go out to the Armenian Christians who have been invaded last week from the forces from Azerbaijan that essentially want to wipe out their existence in that area of the world, which is the Caucasus.
Well, Simon, it's really incredible that this conflict to some degree has been going on for a little while, 9 months. There's been ongoing issues that have been faced, and the individuals who are facing grave threat in Nagorno Karabakh, there's been this slight confusion, I think, in some areas and some communities as to what to make of this conflict. The region itself is to some degree autonomous. It's contested territory by Azerbaijan, but the people are ethnically Armenian. And the atrocities being committed by Azerbaijani forces have by and large gone either unnoticed or they've just simply been ignored by the international media, by international aid groups. Certainly, I don't think this was hitting any of our mainstream press until really just the past week or so.
Well, not even the past week, I'd say only the past couple of days. And yesterday in particular, as we see that 6,500 have already fled their ancient homeland of Nagorno Karabakh, which leaves the less than 120,000 ethnic Armenian Christians at real risk of genocide at the hands of the Azerbaijani forces. And let's also not forget as well, put this in historical context, that Armenia is the oldest Christian country in the world. They were the first nation to convert to Christianity. They have been a beacon of light for Christianity in the Caucasus ever since the 3rd century and had a presence there. They are a deeply religious, spiritual people. They're an incredible community of professionals and architects and businessmen, but sadly they need people to tell their story, and this is why it's so important that we stand up for these Christians, and particularly the Christian Armenians, because their situation, to say the least, is extremely precarious.
Well, for the past 8 months, Azerbaijan has enforced a blockade of 20 miles of land, providing a corridor connecting the province from the rest of Armenia. This has simultaneously led to food, fuel and medical shortages, and it's created this desperate humanitarian crisis. The goal is for Azerbaijan to take over that region and for it to be completely attached to Azerbaijan. But the individuals who are there in Nagorno Karabakh, they identify as Armenian and historically have been recognized as Armenian. And so there's been this attack that's directly putting at risk thousands, tens of thousands of civilians. Many have already fled, and Armenia is encouraging that the remaining 120,000 remove themselves from Nagorno Karabakh and relocate to next door Armenia. If you consider the reality of these sorts of land disputes and borders, a lot of it you can go back and find the historical context in the breakup of the Soviet Union and in the restructuring of borders. A lot of these conflicts relate to that, and various individuals identifying with different political factors over the years. That's something along the lines of what's happening here. What's concerning, though, is that Armenia has a history. It has this horrifying history of being victimized previously, and people have on many occasions expressed never again. We'll have politicians all over the place talking about, whether it's the Holocaust or in really only the past 20 years have people really awakened to the Armenian genocide for the horror that it was. Over 1.5 million were ethnically cleansed. It was the largest Christian targeting of Christians for genocide in history. 1.5 million slain by the Ottoman Turks during the First World War. For decades, next to nothing was said about it. And even Hitler himself said, well, okay, what if we do this to the Jews? Well, it's fine, no one remembers what happened to the Armenians. Well, now we do, and we hashtag and we go on social media and we say, never again, never forget, never again, all of this stuff. And then here we have an opportunity to raise awareness for the situation, to intervene, to do something to make sure that the aid is getting to the Armenians there, to make sure that Azerbaijan is placed under effective sanctions, or that there's a very real military protection of these native Armenians. And we're doing nothing. We're next to nothing.
I know. Well, that's the tragedy of the whole situation. I mean, we know that the Jewish people suffered horrifically during the Second World War, the Holocaust. But the Armenians also faced their own Holocaust, whereby they were sent on the death marches into the deserts in Syria to die. They were transported across the Ottoman Empire via trains to concentration camps. They would put them in caves and kind of gas them. So a lot of these ideas for the Holocaust actually emerged from the genocide committed by the Ottoman Turks. And it was interesting to know that the Germans were the overseers of the ethnic cleansing of the Armenians. So historically, the Armenian people know what it's like to face a genocide, and they face another genocide now. So this is from the Armenian government, have actually warned its citizens in Nagorno Karabakh that if they don't leave, they could face another genocide. And according to a BBC report reporting on the conflict in the Armenians in a village of Kondozor, who have been made refugees, fear that they are not safe under Azerbaijani rule, and did not ever expect to return home. They say Armenia, as we've said before, is the oldest Christian country in the world and is surrounded by hostile Islamic states like Turkey and Azerbaijan in the Caucasus. The Armenian people have suffered 1.5 million deaths at the hands of the Ottoman Turks. And again, where is the international condemnation of Azerbaijan's invasion of Nagorno Karabakh, or Artus, as the Armenians call it?
It's an important question. Looking at the current refugee crisis in Artsakh and Nagorno Karabakh, according to the Gatestone Institute, after besieging and starving 120,000 Armenians of the South Caucasus Republic of Artsakh since December of 2022, the Azerbaijani forces have now launched a full-scale invasion against Artsakh on Wednesday, the 19th of September. They've subjected the capital Stepanakert and other villages and cities to intensive fire using heavy artillery and drones. By the 20th of September, just the next day after that, essentially, Armenian forces were overwhelmed and agreed to disarm. Civilians, including children, have been killed and are being killed, and others are seriously injured, with thousands now fleeing their homes and villages, becoming effectively homeless and indeed stateless. No international presence in the region. No journalist to confirm if the villages surrounded by Azeri forces are even alive. It's a complete humanitarian crisis. And what's interesting is, Simon, we've had now almost, 2 years, very soon, of the conflict between Russia and Ukraine. And there's a disparity in how this situation has been dealt with and how that situation's been dealt with. And I do think that this is partly why in the past couple of days we've seen a shift in this. There have been individuals who've been highlighting, there have been some journalists, I read a very good Time piece last week that highlighted the dissonance between how we've dealt with Russia and Ukraine and how we've dealt with Azerbaijan and Armenia. And it's something that warrants investigation. It's something that warrants discussion as to why there is this.
Well, geostrategically, it's very different from Russia and the Ukraine. Firstly, we know that with the Russian invasion in the Ukraine, this is a direct threat to NATO. It's a direct threat to European national security. And of course, where Armenia is and where Nagorno Karabakh or Artsakh is, you are surrounded by Russia in the north. And usually it's Russia has been the protectorate of the Armenian people, but because of their war against the Ukraine, they can't deploy their forces or get involved. You're then surrounded by Iran, which is traditionally an ally and a friend of the Armenian people, and the Iranians for centuries have looked after the Armenian people. Then you've got another situation there where Azerbaijan are determined to destroy Armenia and the Armenian presence. The same as Turkey. Borders Turkey refuses to recognize the Armenian genocide and their responsibility for the murder of 1.5 million Armenians and other Christians as well. And then how do you actually intervene in this situation where they're not surrounded by kind of Western nations as the Ukraine is in Europe? So I think that is the problem for the international community. Having said that, there are things that can be done. Firstly, the US should withdraw military aid and support to Azerbaijan, bring about economic sanctions against the regime, and even possibly threaten Turkey with NATO membership if she continues to support Azerbaijan and its determination to commit genocide against the Armenian people. So you put that into the equation, it's still a very difficult situation for the West to get involved. But these are precious people. This is a precious Christian community that have kept the gospel alive in that region of the world for centuries. And they have such a strong Christian heritage that it's an imperative that Christians around the world speak up for them, pray for them, and to tell them they're not alone. I mean, some of the reports we've seen since the blockade of Nagorno Karabakh since December of 2022, that the Azerbaijanis have blocked accesses to villages, and they could actually believe that they could be committing massacres and other crimes against the Armenian people because there's a news blockade. There are no news reporters. There is a lack of electricity and internet connectivity because the Azerbaijani forces took out the national grid. Means that there's no electricity, there's no heating, there's very little internet connection. So the 120,000 Armenians in Nagorno Karabakh are going to struggle to communicate what's happening to them. And we see this from Armenian journalist who sent this post on X, which was formerly of Twitter, according to the Gatestone Institute. And this is what he said. He said, "My Facebook feed is full of pictures of missing children since yesterday. Most of them were at school when the Azerbaijani military attacked, so they were separate from their families. The lack of electricity, mobile and internet disruptions complicate the search efforts. We've also seen that Azeri forces have been committing war crimes by targeting Armenian ambulance drivers, including one driver in a particular region of the area. And also, I mean, to actually destroy the electrical grid of a country as well, it's a war crime." Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the horrifying stories shows, the pictures of missing children that essentially were separated from their families because as soon as the Azerbaijani military invades, they're in school. Their families then are forced to try to make their way or to in some way take shelter. Then they aren't able to collect the children, or something happens. The children are not able to. Maybe the children are removed and evacuated by teachers. Who knows? So this is what one user has reported. My Facebook feed is full of pictures of missing children since yesterday. Most of them were at school when the Azerbaijani military attacked. Right. So when we see that sort of thing, we have to recognize there's an element of humanity that we need to be taking into account. The Azerbaijani military is not acting with any degree of of humanity even in that. Of course, we recognize that war has its, there are certain rules of war. They are separating civilians from the ability to make their own way safely elsewhere.
The difference in this one, I mean, for example, if the Azerbaijani forces were targeting Armenian military targets,
right,
that's one thing, but they're not.
No, it's civilians.
They are deliberately wanting to cause misery and suffering amongst the indigenous ethnic Armenians in Nagorno Karabakh or Artsakh in order to ethnically cleanse them from the area. This is why they cut off the land corridor, which is a 20-mile land corridor from Nagorno Karabakh to the Armenian mainland. And this is which runs through Azerbaijan. And the reason why for this corridor is so important is because it provides food, medical supplies, fuel, and is needed to keep the 120,000 Armenian Christians alive. So the fact that the Azerbaijan forces have blocked that corridor since December, so we're talking about over 9 months, to the Armenians, meant that they have been starving them. They have effectively been weakening them, ready for the invasion that we saw last week, and they deliberately been shelling and using military drones against the Armenian population centres.
This isn't new, is it? This has been going on for decades, at least in relation to Armenia as a whole. Armenian regions of Artsakh and also Nakhchivan have faced decades of ethnic cleansing and forced migration. They face immense destruction. Monuments are being targeted, cemeteries, church cemeteries, including the biggest Armenian cemetery in the world. Now, what's interesting, you mentioned earlier some of the geopolitical elements to this. Iran has, yes, supported Armenia, and you have Armenian Christians are really the only protected Christian grouping in Iran. And there are many Armenian believers, and Armenian churches are allowed to function freely in Iran. No one else really is, but they are. At the same time, Azerbaijan has good connections with Iran as well, and Iranians like to go into Azerbaijan for its greater freedom. But Azerbaijan, we have to remember, is Islamic. Azerbaijan is maybe more secular than Iran or Turkey, but it is an Islamic state. And so we can't rule out that there's some degree of a religious element, I don't think, in these attacks. And also in the seeming, apathy of the rest of the world to the Armenian plight. Do you think that's fair?
Yeah, I think that's a fair assessment, Regan. But also I think we have to state as well that Azerbaijan's closest ally is Turkey. And don't forget, during the time of the Ottoman Empire and the Young Turks, that they ethnically cleanse the Armenians and other Christian minorities during the First World War, and then going into the 20s as well. So this is something that Turkey has never come to terms with. And of course, what happened as a recording of this program yesterday, that President Erdogan, together with the president of Azerbaijan, met in Nagorno Karabakh yesterday, and they proposed to create a land corridor through Armenia that will connect Turkey with Azerbaijan. So when you see the actions of the Azerbaijani forces, you know that they've got the backing of the Turkish government. Right. And this is where sanctions need to be placed on both Turkey and Azerbaijan, and the international condemnation on both these nations, and the untold suffering that this is bringing on the Armenian people.
Well, the region was completely separated from the rest of the area. It's been given its own independence. The Soviet Union, obviously the whole area in that region, but it was agreed that the Armenian provinces of Artsakh, the province primarily in question here, and Nakhchivan would remain under the authority of the Armenian Soviet Socialist state. However, just after this was confirmed and documented, Joseph Stalin, embracing his typical divide and conquer strategy of destabilizing non-Russian states dictated that Artsakh and Nakhchivan, this other historic province of Armenia, would now come under the authority of the Azerbaijan SSR as autonomous oblasts. Though Armenians comprised 95% of Artsakh at the time, by the 1980s that number was gradually reduced to 75%. Still quite a significant majority. Those who were not there were either killed, generally, or forcibly migrated. Along with ethnic cleansing of Armenians, they similarly destroyed countless Armenian monuments, cemeteries, and churches, which is par for the course with the Soviet Union. Anything that had any ultra-religious taint or anything that seemed to be pro-Christian was generally heavily suppressed or quashed. It was a program not just of ethnic cleansing in regards to genocide, the taking of people's lives, but we have to remember that ethnic cleansing also features very primarily the destruction of individual cultures. It's not just about the taking of life, it's also about the destroying of important artifacts, the attempts to erase elements of history, the destruction of and replacing of important cultural observances and artifacts, the defacing of public monuments. All of that is part of a rewriting attempt that makes it paints a bigger picture here. It's not only about loss of life, we're talking about the erosion of a whole culture.
More than erosion, the eradication of a culture, of a history, of a people,
Absolutely.
Which amounts to genocide, and that's effectively what the Azerbaijanis are interested in, and also the Turks as well. And this is why the case surrounding what happened to the other province of Nagorno, if I could pronounce that. If you're Armenian watching and I pronounce that, I apologise. I'm struggling with my Armenian names. So, effectively, this was an area that the Azerbaijani forces actually took hold of conquered. And they committed a massacre of killing 10,000 Armenians were killed in a single massacre there, but within a few decades the Armenian population was completely eradicated. And again, it was not only the Armenian people that had been erased from the land, but also their history as well. So we see that Azerbaijan has got a history of genocide against the Armenian people. And when we hear the Azerbaijani president say that the Armenians are safe under our control, it's absolute lies, because they face total destruction. So let's have a look at this excellent CBN news report reporting on the situation currently in Nagorno Karabakh.
Videos and images showing thousands of ethnic Armenians trying to flee Nagorno Karabakh have shocked human rights activists.
This is a recipe for mass atrocities.
Joel Veldkamp of Christian Solidarity International fears the worst is yet to come for the people living in the landlocked region between Armenia and Azerbaijan. Earlier this week, Azerbaijani forces launched an attack just before an announced truce. Uncertainty still abounds, however.
This is being widely reported as a ceasefire. Many journalists, many observers seem to think that this means that the fighting is over, the violence is over, the danger is over. That is not true at all. This is the most dangerous moment right now.
Veldkamp believes abuse, chaos, and violence against the Armenians will continue now that they've basically surrendered.
The government of the Republic of Artsakh surrendered to the invading forces of Azerbaijan. They agreed to disband all of their self-defense forces, to lay down their weapons, and to hold negotiations on quote-unquote reintegration into Azerbaijan.
Veldkamp's main concern is for the 120,000 occupied Armenians still trapped inside Nagorno Karabakh.
There has been no electricity for most of the population of Nagorno Karabakh for 43 hours now. That means that people have not been able to charge their cell phones or their computers. People aren't able to communicate about what's happening to them. Azerbaijani troops have occupied the country. They control most of the main roads. There are many, many villages that are cut off from the rest of Nagorno-Karabakh.
For decades, deadly battles have raged between Armenians and Azerbaijanis over the territory. Last December's blockade reignited those tensions, cutting off residents from food, medicine, and other essential resources.
This is an area of Armenia, Nagorno-Karabakh, that has been contested for many years, largely because when the Soviet Union took over Armenia, it carved it up with Azerbaijan and many of the other countries in strange ways. So there's a little area of Armenia. It has historically been filled with Armenians, Armenian cultures, the Christian faith.
Azerbaijan attacked the region 3 years ago, trying to take it over. Curry sees these latest efforts as an attempt to finish that quest.
They're intensifying this and trying to push out all of the ethnic Armenians and Christians within this region.
Experts now fear Armenia, one of Christianity's oldest communities, could face a second genocide if the international community doesn't act fast.
How could we be so far away from our brothers and sisters? How can we be so ignorant about the first Christian nation, about the first nation in the 20th century to experience a real genocide? What is wrong with us?
Veldkamp is encouraging Christians worldwide to pray and call on Western leaders to intervene and save Armenian lives. Billy Hollowell, CBN News.
We have a very special guest for the program this evening. Warm welcome to the Armenian ambassador to the UK, Varjan Narcissian. Welcome to the program.
Thank you very much to Revelation TV for this invitation.
Would you please update us on the current situation as thousands of ethnic Armenians are fleeing their ancient homeland in Nagorno Karabakh? Please tell us a little bit about what's going on.
Well, thank you very much. First of all, the situation is dire on the ground, as yesterday the mass exodus of the Armenian population from their ancestral land of Nagorno Karabakh or Artsakh has started. In the aftermath of the massive attack by Azerbaijani armed forces against the peaceful population of 120,000 people that they have shamelessly and cynically called as a counter-terrorist operation. 120,000 people have been trapped and besieged for more than 9 months in a devastating blockade. The population has been weakened in this deliberate starvation, forced subjugation project. This was nothing but a project aimed at forcefully to subjugate the people of Nagorno Karabakh to the dictatorship in Azerbaijan. While the people of Nagorno Karabakh, in their determination for their freedom and aspiration to live freely in their homeland, they couldn't receive that forceful subjugation. They refused that. And ultimately, Azerbaijan attacked them just several days ago. So this is what happened. And as a result of this attack, there are more than 200 casualties, killed people, including 5 children, more than 400, wounded people, many more missing people, because when people started to migrate in this chaotic situation, when the troops were attacking the civilian population, there are still many people who are missing, including children. So this is what's happening. And as of yesterday, they opened the road. Azerbaijan, of course, after the attack and the ceasefire reached upon with the authorities of Nagorno Karabakh, they now opened the road, which is, of course, Azerbaijan's long pre-planned and premeditated plan. Now they are presenting it as a humanitarian corridor, but this is nothing but a ethnic cleansing. As of today, already 15,000 people arrived in Armenia. You might see the pictures, the images. They are in a poor condition. The people, women, children, they just arrived. They're weakened, and it's a terrible disaster what's going on.
And Your Excellency, can you just kind of share with us how this very much looks like it's premeditated? I mean, we're talking about a 9 months blockade from the ethnic communities of Armenia in Artsakh with the mainland of Armenia, and to actually cut off medical supplies, food supplies, fuel. We know that your people in Nagorno Karabakh are in a desperate situation. Just share with us how this has been used to weaken your people. And of course, we had the horrific invasion that took place and the silence of the international community regarding war crimes being committed by Azerbaijani forces against your people.
Well, absolutely. First of all, Azerbaijan found the fact that it shows that this is a premeditated and pre-planned ethnic cleansing and even a genocide, as the former prosecutor general from the International Criminal Court, Mr. Luis Moreno Ocampo, called it as a genocide, what's going on currently in Nagorno Karabakh. First of all, Azerbaijan found an artificial pretext to blockade the road as of December 12th last year. So soon it would be just a year. They blockaded under the fake, considerations that there are illegal mining going on or transfer of weapons. All of this not have been presented any single proof by Azerbaijan. So they brought so-called environmentalists, and Azerbaijan as a dictatorship, no one risks to do protests. So out of sudden, hundreds of so-called protesters appeared on the road under the protection of Azerbaijani armed forces and blockaded the road. Unfortunately, the Russian peacekeepers who were supposed to control that road didn't take serious measures to open the corridor, because according to November 9 ceasefire statement, the corridor, Lachin corridor, was supposed to be under the control of the peacekeepers of Russian Federation. So Azerbaijan blatantly violated the ceasefire when it blockaded the road. For 9 months, the population has been starving, no food, no medication, no supplies, and they have been terrorized by Azerbaijani government by constant attacks. For instance, when people would go out in the fields and to try to do their agricultural works, Azerbaijani snipers would shoot at them, not allow to harvest, any food, so that they are deprived of any source of food. So they have been terrorized from all sides. Moreover, in the second or third month of this blockade, the International Court of Justice adopted a legally binding decision instructing Azerbaijan to immediately and unconditionally to open the corridor. And Azerbaijan, in a blatant violation of international law, didn't open the corridor. It pretended that it's not hearing those international calls. There have been many international organizations, leaders who have been calling upon to open the corridor. And Azerbaijan has pretended that they are not hearing. They have been saying even deceiving the international community and saying the corridor is open. Well, if the corridor is open, how comes that no international organization, no international media, and nobody, let alone food or medication, didn't had any access to Nagorno Karabakh? So the population, this heroic population of Artsakh, has been for 9 months fighting with Azerbaijani dictatorship's blockade. And we have been calling upon the international community to immediately dispatch UN missions. But unfortunately, there was no major international attempt to force Azerbaijan through sanctions, through other measures, to open the corridor. And Azerbaijan used they didn't acknowledge the fact that the attack that they undertook, it was during the days of the UN General Assembly. So they did it deliberately to show the level of ignorance, how they ignored and they don't care about the opinion of the international community. So on the opening days of the UN General Assembly, Azerbaijan undertakes an attack. What is this? This shows the level of ignorance Azerbaijan has towards the international norms and standards and international community's opinion. And this is how this ethnic cleansing these days is being carried out in front of our eyes. So the population out-migrates. Most of the people, unfortunately, are going to out-migrate because they have seen from Azerbaijan constant threats and provocations. Moreover, they have seen Armenian cultural, religious monuments being desecrated and eradicated from the, how can Azerbaijan? Now Azerbaijan says that they are going to reintegrate Armenians. Well, Armenians have never been part of Azerbaijan, of that part of Nagorno Karabakh, has been forcefully given to Soviet Azerbaijan by Soviet Union. There is no single international decision that legitimizes Nagorno Karabakh being a part of Azerbaijan. It was the Soviet Union that donated Nagorno Karabakh as a gift between the undercarpet deals between the Soviets at the time, Bolshevik authorities and Kemalists in Turkey. This is how Nagorno Karabakh appeared in Azerbaijan, and Azerbaijanis, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, took it for granted. But we are witnessing a tragic page of the not only Armenian but of the human history, when collective human rights of an entire people is being brutally violated by Azerbaijan, supported by Turkey, and the international community in general is silent against this mass atrocity against the Armenian people in Nagorno-Karabakh.
His Excellency, thank you so much for your helpful perspective. Would you please, in this final question, tell us what your message is to the British government? Widespread ignorance in regard to this immense humanitarian crisis. What words do you have to share to the British government? What do you want them to do?
Well, of course, we are in constant touch with British government, and UK has made its position clear at the recent United Nations Security Council session when upon the request of Armenian government, a special session was convened in New York, and we appreciate UK government's position expressed at that Security Council special session. But at this point, it's not only to UK government, it's to the international community, basically, that before the last people out-migrate from Nagorno-Karabakh in this forceful, depopulation of the Armenian population, international community has still a chance to rescue this beacon of Armenian and Christian civilization in Nagorno-Karabakh. This land has been populated for millennia with Armenian people. Armenian people have created their innumerous monuments of Armenian Christian cultural heritage, such as the fantastic church of Gandzasar, a beautiful church of Shushi Cathedral that has been desecrated and destroyed by Azerbaijani bombardment, or the recent monastery of Amaras that has been taken control of the Azerbaijani forces just 2-3 days ago. Those relics, those unique cultural monuments of Armenian Christian heritage are completely under threat. But this is not only about monuments. First of all, this is about the Armenian presence on their ancestral land. And this would be a big loss, not only for the Armenian people, if Azerbaijanis succeed in their plans to depopulate Nagorno-Karabakh.
Ambassador, we just thank you so much for giving up your very precious time to talk to us today. Just to let you know that our hearts and our prayers are with you and the Armenian people at this particular time in history. We pray also that the international community would get its act together and prevent another genocide of your people, as what happened during the First World War with the Ottoman Turks. And we just pray that may the international Christian community around the world provide support, aid and prayer for your precious community. So thank you so much for joining us on Behind the Headlines today.
Thank you very much for your prayers and your support. Thank you.
Well, incredibly thankful for the very helpful perspective from the Armenian ambassador to the UK there. Thank you again, Simon, for arranging that. It's fantastic.
I've also got Barbara Fernandez to thank, because she helped me get that. So thank you very much, Barbara, for such a great guest to interview. And it's such an important topic. And also a lot of credit needs to be given to CBN for focusing on this as a story where we've been able to show the excellent news report. Sadly, we're seeing so much of this lacking on our mainstream media, particularly when we see the plight of these Armenian Christians who are gentle, very kind, hospitable people that are suffering essentially war crimes by the Azerbaijani forces?
Well, they have, to be fair, been covering this situation for a couple of years now. Around Christmas time of 2021, they were reporting on some of the situation in Armenia itself, but then 8 months ago, as that blockade that we've been speaking of was imposed, they've been right there on the front lines reporting, while as our mainstream press has said precious little this whole time. But hopefully this report will go some way to educating our viewers and informing and hopefully inspiring to further action, and we pray and trust others will get on board as well. Now, some may be wondering, because we're talking about this place, Artsakh, we're talking about this other province, non-existent now, Nakhchivan, and by the 1980s, this is where this hopefully clarifies a little bit. The Armenians of Artsakh claimed the right of self-determination. So the region that we're talking about is technically its own autonomous, independent region. From both Armenia and Azerbaijan. But the individuals there are ethnic Armenian and proud of that fact. They were not simply willing to disappear, as was the case, as what happened in Nakhchivan. As a result, then, the Azeri authorities organized massacres and ethnic cleansing of the Armenian population across all of Azerbaijan's territories, particularly in the cities of Sumgait, Baku, and Kirovabad. This is a recent history. This is not just the First World War, which we were talking about. This is genocide in the 1980s in Azerbaijan. Several years later, in 1991, following the fall of the Soviet Union, the Armenian provincial government of Artsakh declared its independence from Azerbaijan as per the Supreme Soviet's ruling regarding autonomous oblasts. This article, number 3, followed the directives of Article 2, outlining the process by which Soviet states would declare independence, ignoring the appeals made by the international community, particularly the UN Security Council calling Azerbaijan to cease military actions. Azerbaijan immediately launched a large-scale Azeri military incursion against the newly formed Republic of Artsakh, Nagorno Karabakh. And so we see this fight has been going on for so long, this disputed territory and what was doubtless a beleaguered people struggling for existence. Not only, though, as we've already said, in regard to their population and in regard to their people, but also in regard to their culture, with the eradication and attempt to just completely remove important cultural features.
No, absolutely, which is a sign of genocide, essentially. So what we're seeing then is the eradication of these, what UNESCO described as these beautiful, according to my notes here, beautifully carved stones. They had 12,000 of these beautiful crosses that are carved in Armenia, in this area. And then we see the Azerbaijani forces destroyed them, dumping the rubble adjacent to the Arkansas River, which has been described as the greatest cultural act of genocide of the 21st century. So we know that what the true intentions of the Azerbaijan government is, and their dictator and forces, when you know that they're destroying the heritage, the culture, and the history of the Armenian people in that region. We saw also with the 2020 invasion of Artsakh occurred during COVID-19. So we know that the world was dealing with COVID-19, the global pandemic. The Azerbaijani forces saw this as an opportunity to launch almost a 4 or 5 week invasion of Nagorno Karabakh in order to take that territory in which the Armenian forces fought very hard but lost a number of different soldiers. But we also see back then crimes of genocide and crimes of war crimes being committed by Azerbaijani forces together with mercenaries who went alongside to fight with the Azerbaijani forces. I mean, one such case, and this is horrific, Armenian soldiers who actually captured Azerbaijani mercenaries revealed that they'd been hired by Turkey and were offered $100 for each American head they cut off, as the plight of Armenian soldiers captured by Syrian mercenaries fighting with Azerbaijani forces would actually take their phones, record their torture and beheadings live on their Facebook pages for their family to see. And essentially, that's a war crime.
Absolutely. The silence of the international community and the mainstream media is shocking, as Azerbaijan forces have carried out executions, beheadings of soldiers, civilians, including men and women, the elderly, and displaced thousands of Armenians. There has been an agreed ceasefire, and there was an agreement to end the conflict in 2020. Only just over a year ago, though, on September the 13th of 2022, Azerbaijan launched a military attack on Armenia itself. So not even this disputed territory, on Armenia itself. They used multiple rocket launchers, drone attacks. They killed 210 Armenian soldiers and a number of civilians as well. Now, the question may be asked by some, well, what if Armenia surrenders Artsakh to Azerbaijan? Well, essentially it's been taken by force as of right now. It's not really in their control at the moment. This is still an ongoing and very live, and as you've already said, rapidly developing situation. If Armenia surrendered Artsakh to Azerbaijan, they would not stop there, though. And this is what's clear, that they're not stopping there. This is not their intent. And they and the Turks ultimately want what the Ottomans wanted back in the First World War, the complete destruction of Armenia and its people. They want the destruction of Armenian Christians. They want the destruction of Armenia as a nation state. The president of Azerbaijan has said that Armenia as a country is of no value. Imagine that, Simon. Just the gall to say that. Here's an independent people, an autonomous people. They have sovereignty over their borders. And you are someone from a completely different state, a state that has links to all sorts of insidious characters and has links to all sorts of war crime as well as in its history. And you have the gall to say this nation state, which is, we can say, arguably very peace-loving, is a country of no value.
It's the kind of thing you expect from like Hitler to actually say that.
Exactly.
And therefore, if the country has no value, then the people have no value.
Well, this is the
makes
value.
It easier to actually then commit genocide as well. And also the fact is that we chased the dogs out of our lands like dogs, was the quote by the Azerbaijani president, with a reference to not even recognising the Armenian people as actual people either. And of course, you know, this is because why are the Azerbaijani forces doing this, backed up by the Turks? Because they don't like the presence of Christianity in that area of the world in their midst. This is essentially what this is about. And we know that we're not dealing with flesh and blood here, but principalities and the powers of darkness. And what we're seeing today unfold is nothing but evil in the actions of the Azerbaijani forces, the actions of the Azerbaijani state backed up by the Turks. So let's have a look at this excellent news item produced by CBN that is literally 8 months old, looking at the beginning of the blockade of the only land corridor connecting Nagorno Karabakh, or Artsakh, with Armenia mainland. And this is the humanitarian crisis that it caused.
There is no time to wait and to allow the next genocide, because this is genocide.
That's how Dr. Bayana Sukhudian describes the situation in Nagorno Karabakh, a small landlocked region between Armenia and Azerbaijan. For decades, deadly battles between Armenians and Azerbaijanis have raged there, and a recent blockade has reignited those tensions.
The last big war in Karabakh happened in 2020. And at that time, Azerbaijan conquered most of the territory all around the enclave. And so there's only one road that connects the 120,000 Christians who live in this enclave to the rest of the world. And it's protected by a Russian peacekeeping force.
On December 12th, Azerbaijani protesters reportedly blocked that road, known as the Lachin Corridor, preventing food, medicine, and other basic transport in or out of Nagorno Karabakh.
I'm a pediatric neurologist. Together with my colleague, we so many children with epilepsy who have to take anti-seizure drug to get free of seizures, but now there is shortage of these drugs. And not only these drugs are not available, but also some painkillers and antibiotics, as well as hormonal therapy, which is very important in acute situations. In addition with that, there is shortage of baby formulas.
The blockade sparked immediate condemnation, with critics across the world calling on Azerbaijan to halt the obstruction. Ruben Vardanyan, Minister of State for Nagorno Karabakh, believes the region's most recent battles stem, in part, from a clash of worldviews.
One conflict is a democratic country against the non-democratic, autocratic country, because in Azerbaijan, everybody knows we don't have a democratic system, and we all know with their own citizens, Azeris, they don't have a right to human rights.
With both Armenia and Azerbaijan laying claim to this land, the dynamic is complex. Armenia gained control in the early 1900s, and then a 2020 Russian-brokered ceasefire handed Azerbaijan newfound control. Joel Veldkamp is among those who worry the worst is yet to come for Armenia, one of Christianity's oldest communities.
I think this is probably the prelude to an Azerbaijani armed attack on Nagorno Karabakh. And if that happens and Russia does not step in, Armenia is probably not strong enough to stop them from conquering the whole region. There will be massacres. And at the end of it, this land, which is the ancient homeland of the Armenian people, this is where their alphabet was designed, it has some of the oldest churches in the world, will be completely destroyed.
This is Billy Hollowell for CBN News.
Always thankful for CBN and their invaluable reporting on such issues, in particular this that we're discussing now. This region has some strategic placement, Simon. It's in a very mountainous region in the South Caucasus. So Azerbaijan does look at it as something that they would want to attain. They continue to claim it as their own, but it is the ancient home of the Armenian people, and it's been in their hands, in Armenian hands, for over 3 decades since they gained independence in 1991 with the collapse of the Soviet Union. Azerbaijan is simply not accepting that reality and is willing to implement acts of genocide to claim it as theirs.
I mean, it's a very similar situation that Israel faces. I mean, Israel surrounded or was surrounded by hostile states around it. Now Israel is surrounded by hostile terrorist states that want to see a destruction, including Iran. We also see that, for example, Judea and Samaria, which is the biblical heartland of Israel, a rewriting of history, saying that this was never Jewish land or Jewish territory, and this is occupied Palestinian territory. When we know all the archaeological evidence, we know from the Bible that this is the biblical heritage of Israel, and it's a complete rewriting of history, and the same applies to Armenia as well.
We have to be able to be honest and resist that as well, to call a spade in that reality. And I think it's very important, Simon, that viewers look at ways, whatever way we can, to voice our support for the Armenian people. You can find the contact details for your MP very readily online. Write your MP, flag this, even send them a link to this program. Tell them about your concern for the Armenian people. Additionally, you can keep an eye on various demonstrations that are taking place. Simon, this past weekend there was a big demonstration that took place outside Downing Street along Whitehall. Those demonstrations happen regularly for different reasons, on behalf of different causes, but I'm sure we'll be seeing more such as we saw just this past weekend outside of Downing Street, where Armenians and well-wishers gathered, and they were present to defend the right of this region and its existence.
Yeah, I think we got some photographs and some footage of that demonstration outside 10 Downing Street. There we go. So we see the Armenian flag, and this is with the kind of very small Armenian community protesting. Look, essentially a media blackout, which I completely agree with this one. There's hardly been any news coverage on this one, and really kind of making their voices known because no one else will actually listen to them. So, you know, our hearts and our prayers must go out to the Armenian people during this time. We got to pray for the situation facing almost the 120,000 ethnic Armenians who faced the prospect of a possible genocide at the hands of Azerbaijani forces as well. We know that our Foreign Office can actually condemn, and our government can actually condemn the Azerbaijani forces committing war crimes against the Armenian people for a start. Our government, together with the United States, can place economic sanctions upon Azerbaijan. And any military funding and cooperation we have with Azerbaijan has to stop in order to protect these very precious Christian communities.
Absolutely, and the failure to stand up to this aggression on Azerbaijan's part could result in a needless escalation in that area. It could lead to the destruction not only of Armenians and outside, but also lead to wider war in the region as the situation escalates unchecked. Azerbaijan and perhaps even its close ally Turkey could pursue territorial ambitions elsewhere in southern Armenia, maybe across Armenia as a whole, and indeed North Iran as well. The U.S. President, UK Prime Minister, these are leaders of NATO really could very easily call the Azerbaijani president warning of those dangerous consequences, the dangerous consequences of sanctions, and also, even if necessary, of military intervention if they continue in their blatantly genocidal acts.
Regan, it's great to be doing a program with you, particularly as we discuss the humanitarian crisis facing Armenian Christians in Nagorno Karabakh. We can't deny that we serve a powerful God, and we need to pray for miracles. We need to pray for divine intervention, that God would protect his ancient people, the Armenian Christians, who are sadly on the verge of genocide. So thank you for watching this week's edition of Behind the Headlines.